But I understand it's an hour, something like that, right?
Yes, Prabhu. And yes. And at
Tonight the topic is, yeah, please, you can set it up for me and then I'll speak.
Yeah, we were finishing up. So far for the last 3 months, we have been systematically going through the Bhagavad-Gita pretty much every day. And we are now in the 18th chapter, finishing it up. So we thought having you conclude that session would be extremely beneficial for us, talking about surrender, Krishna's final instruction in the Bhagavad-Gita. So yeah, you may speak for as long as you like, and in the end we'll leave some time for question and answers.
Okay, all right. Do you usually read from the Bhagavad-Gita also?
Yes, Prabhu.
All right. Well, why don't you read Sarvadharman Parija and the purport? When you mentioned that I got a magazine when I was young, that was there was a featured verse in every one of the Back to Godhead magazines, and that's the first verse I read from the Bhagavad Gita with the purport, and it impressed me so much. And so I think it bears repeating, even if you've heard it before. And then I'll speak on the topic.
Yes,
does that
Prabhu.
sound good?
Yes, Prabhu.
If you can,
let me share the screen.
have you shared?
Verse number.
ऊपर होगा ना कुछ?
Okay. Is the verse visible, Prabhu?
Yes, it is.
Okay. You want me to read it, or?
Yes, please.
Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja tam tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma suchaha. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. The Lord has described various kinds of knowledge and processes of religion. Knowledge of the Supreme Brahman, knowledge of the Super Soul, knowledge of the different types of orders and statuses of social life, knowledge of the renounced order of life, knowledge of non-attachment, sense and mind control, meditation, etc. He has described in so many ways different types of religion. Now, in summarizing Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that Arjuna should give up all the processes that have been explained to him. He should simply surrender to Krishna. That surrender will save him from all kinds of sinful reactions, for the Lord personally promises to protect him. In the 7th chapter, it was said that only one who has become free from all sinful reactions can take to the worship of Lord Krishna. Thus, one may think that unless he is free from all sinful reactions, he cannot take to the surrendering process. To such doubts, it is here said that even if one is not free from all sinful reactions, simply by the process of surrendering to Sri Krishna, he is automatically freed. There is no need of strenuous effort to free oneself from sinful reactions. One should unhesitatingly accept Krishna as the supreme savior of all living entities. With faith and love, one should surrender unto him. The process of surrender to Krishna is described in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. Anukulasya sankalpa pratikulasya varjanam rakshayishyatiti vishwaso goputritve varanam tatha atmanikshepa karparne shadvidar saranagati.
According to the devotional process, one should simply accept such religious principles that will lead ultimately to the devotional service of the Lord. One may perform a particular occupational duty according to his position in the social order, But if by executing his duty one does not come to the point of Krishna consciousness, all his activities are in vain. Anything that does not lead to the perfectional stage of Krishna consciousness should be avoided. One should be confident that in all circumstances, Krishna will protect him from all difficulties. There is no need of thinking how one should keep the body and soul together. Krishna will see to that. One should always think himself helpless and should consider Krishna the only basis for his progress in life. As soon as one seriously engages himself in devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness, at once he becomes free from all contamination of material nature. There are different processes of religion and purificatory processes by cultivation of knowledge, meditation in the mystic yoga system, etc. But one who surrenders unto Krishna does not have to execute so many methods. That simple surrender unto Krishna will save him from unnecessarily wasting time. One can thus make all progress at once and be freed from all sinful reactions.
One should be attracted by the beautiful vision of Krishna. His name is Krishna because he is all attractive. One who becomes attracted by the beautiful, all-powerful, omnipotent vision of Krishna is fortunate. There are different kinds of transcendentalists. Some of them are attached to the impersonal Brahman vision. Some of them are attracted by the super soul feature, etc. But one who is attracted to the personal feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and above all, one who is attracted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Krishna himself, is the most perfect transcendentalist. In other words, devotional service to Krishna in full consciousness is the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is the essence of the whole Bhagavad-Gita. Karma yogis, empiric philosophers, mystics, and devotees are called transcendentalists, but one who is a pure devotee is the best of all. The particular words used here, masucha, don't fear, don't hesitate, don't worry, are very significant. One may be perplexed as to how one can give up all kinds of religious forms and simply surrender unto Krishna, but such worry is useless.
Namasheshtam manamapi sachiputram matra sarupam shirupam tasyagrajam uruparim maturim goshtavatim Radha Kundam Girivaramoho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasa Pratikpriya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi He Guru Gyanadadina Bandho Swadandadata Kununaika Sindo Vrindavana Sinahitavatar Prasida Radha Pranaya Pracharo Matsamo Nasti Papa Manaparadi Chakashchana Parihare Pilajja Mekin Bruve Purushotama Yavatinam yata yuni yunam cha yuvata yata manobira bate tadvan manomera matam dvayi Bhumaus kalita paranam bhumireva valambaram tvayi jata paradanam tvameva sharanam prabho Govinda balabe radhe partai tvamaham sada tvariyam iti janatu govindo mam tvaya saha Radhe Vrindavanadi Shekaruna Vrittavahani Kripaya Nijapadabja Tasimayam Pratyatam Hantayam Adrabalahari Rasavaryo Yadrama Krishna Charanashmarasha Pramoda Manam Tanoti Sahago Ganayos Tayo Yat Paniya Suya Vasakandana Kandamulai Nitai Namineche Namirhat Te Sharamulyanam Dite Chere Nitai Namineche Namirhate Shradamulyanam Dite Chere Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Brinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Sarvadharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Ahang Tvang Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishami Masuchaha. So, as human beings, we're always looking for something thrilling to do. People gamble because they feel some sense of exhilaration that what might happen next. And of course, people go on roller coasters and things like that to try to find some thrill, because otherwise life just in maintenance can be quite routine and boring. So if anybody wants a permanent thrill, moment to moment, day to day, then you can just follow this verse. And Krishna says, just surrender unto me, don't worry about anything else. So those who want the ultimate thrill of life, you can just say, okay, I'm going to try this. In fact, Srila Prabhupada once said that we have these 4 regulative principles. One of them is no gambling. He said there's a replacement for that. Just surrender to Krishna. Just gamble your whole life away and say, I give it to Krishna, whatever he does, fine. And see what happens. Of course, we know in the histories of great personalities, whatever walk of life they come from. We know about Gajendra, we know about Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad, Bali Maharaj, all of them. They're famous because they did just that. They said, okay, I'm putting it in Krishna's hands. I give up. And I find sometimes when we hear this verse, there's a sense, surrender. That sounds quite drastic, doesn't it? Do you find it sounding drastic? You know, you surrender your passport, then what is going to happen next? Surrender your life to Krishna. This could be, it could sound scary. So let's just talk a little bit about what it means, actually. First, I'll give you a proposal, and I'd like to hear what your opinion is. And it's a doctrine of preemptive giving. So here's the idea, and then you tell me what you think. First of all, everything that we now have isn't ours anyway. What is your opinion, Prem Dham Prabhu? Whatever we have is not doesn't belong to us.
Yes, I agree with you, Maharaj.
What
Yes,
about your
it doesn't-
body? You have your hands, feet, hair, head, everything that belongs to you, right?
No, it doesn't.
Can you
belong
prove
to
that?
me.
Well, how would you prove it doesn't belong to you?
Well, I can lose it at any moment.
Oh, okay. So when we're born, we sign a lease, and the body is leased to us, right? Did you all sign a lease? Amrita, did you sign a lease when you were born that said you get to keep the body for a certain number of years?
I think so, yeah.
You did? Where is it?
I don't know. That part I don't know.
Maybe it's out in the car. You left it in the car. So
Probably.
the thing is, we don't know. We're given this body as a temporary gift. The Srimad Bhagavatam says, Labvam sudurlavam idam bahusambhavante manushamartadam anityam apihadhira. It's a very rare gift that we're given, but there is no lease. We didn't sign when you were a baby. They didn't hand you a pen and say you get to keep this body for, 84 years. There's no guarantee at any time. And that's why the verse says, anityam, it's temporary. It could be taken back at any time. And that includes everything that we have. So if you think about that, everything we have is not ours because it can be taken back. So that means we're going to lose it anyway, right? Say yes.
Yes.
So the benefits to surrendering are this. If you give it preemptively to Krishna before it's taken away, and here's how it's taken away, unceremoniously. And let me tell you what that word means. Unceremonious means having or showing a lack of courtesy, rough or abrupt. Unceremonious means having or showing a lack of courtesy, rough or abrupt. So whatever we have, including the body and my hair, or hands, toes, fingers, shoes, house, car, at some point will be taken away abruptly and without any courtesy. That's the rule of the material world. But there's a special clause, and that is that if you give it away before it's taken away unceremoniously, you get credit. If you give it away to a good cause before it's unceremoniously repossessed, then you get credit. Doesn't that sound like a good idea?
Yes.
The only problem is we don't know when that's going to be. We're not really sure when it's going to be taken back. So the devotees consider everything on loan, and then they just say, okay, I'm just using it in Krishna's service. This is the mood of surrender of the devotees, to have this understanding that everything belongs to Krishna. And in the verse today, Srila Prabhupada quoted a famous verse that talks about what surrender means. And the word for surrender in the verse he gave is Sharanagati, which is the path of taking shelter. And so if you get into really big debt, is that possible? You get a credit card or two, whatever, you take out a second on your house, you spend and you live very opulently for a while, and then you realize you have a huge debt. And what if the creditors are calling and you can't pay it back? What do you do legally?
Bankruptcy.
Declare bankruptcy.
Take out another credit card.
Yes. Wrong. You declare bankruptcy. Whoever said that is right. You go before a judge and you say, I can't pay back all this debt, and therefore I need your protection. It's called bankruptcy protection. And the judge says, okay, creditors, leave them alone. I'm going to consolidate all the debt, and we're going to come up with a reasonable plan to pay it back. And this verse is all about bankruptcy protection, because karma is a kind of debt that we incur from living in the world. You can't help it because we have to live by taking. It's called in the Bhagavatam, ahastani sahastanam apharani chatushparam palguni tatra mahatam jivo jivasta jivanam. One living being feeds upon another in this material world just to live. Even if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you're still eating plants. And so just by moving around, breathing, everything, we're taking the lives of others just so we can sustain ours. That's what jivo jivasta jivanam means. We get a debt because of the way that we live in this world. It's a predatory kind of existence, and it's natural that we develop karma. And then after some time, we can't pay it back at all. So Krishna offers this bankruptcy protection. He says, just come to me. I'm the judge, and you just take shelter. I'll consolidate all your debt and I'll absolve you of it. And instead of serving all these independent causes, you just serve me and I'll take care of you. Does that sound like an okay idea?
Yes, Prabhu.
Sounds good. Okay. So the verse Prabhupada quoted, Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. So this verse gives a little bit more nuance about what it means to surrender. And so the first part of the verse says, Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. Accept those things that are favorable and reject those things that are unfavorable to the performance of devotional service. There's 4 others, but I'm only going to go into the first 2 to keep it really simple. So this is what surrender means practically enacted in our life, is to accept things that are favorable, reject things that are unfavorable. Okay so far, everybody? Loka?
Yes.
Keep going?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give a few suggestions about things that we can accept, and things that we could reject. And I would like to get your evaluation on what you think about these. Is that all right? Okay?
Okay.
You ready? Okay, things to accept. Somebody's flying on an airplane. Okay. Okay, so first thing to accept is Krishna's plan. The thing to reject is your plan. I'll say it again. Best thing to accept is Krishna's plan, and the thing to reject is your plan. So Krishna's plan is prepare for the next life. Your plan, and I'm not talking about you all because you're already following Krishna's plan, but think of it hypothetically. Your plan is to enjoy this life as much as possible. Get as many things in order and as many enjoyable things as possible in this life to enjoy. Is that a philosophy? Have you ever heard that philosophy before?
Hedonism.
It used to hedonism. Thank you. It used to be a bumper sticker that says, "He who dies with the most toys wins." But it's implicit in Bed Bath and Beyond. I mean, there are elaborate stores to, nothing wrong with having a nice bathroom, but there are ways in which there's a emphasis on getting comfortable in the material world. And that's the main point, how to be comfortable. And then death is an afterthought, and it'll never happen. So that's my plan. But Krishna's plan is no, use this lifetime to get ready for the next. So one thing to accept is Krishna's plan. This is the idea of surrender, and reject my plan, which is I just want to get comfortable in the material world. That's the first one. The second one is to accept an attitude that is service-oriented and grateful. You can reject the attitude of the victim. So somebody whose attitude is grateful and in line with Krishna asks this question when anything happens in his or her life, and that is, what's the lesson? What is Krishna trying to teach me? And the person who has an attitude that needs to be given up, which would be an act of surrender, is, why me? Why do bad things happen to good people? Because I'm a good person, and why did something bad happen to me? So you have the choice of adjusting your attitude, and that's an act of surrender. So this is mentioned in the Shastra. The Lord Brahma says, Tenu kampam samikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam ridvagvapur vira viridam namaste jiveta yo mukti pade sadhaya bhak. That if you can adjust your attitude so that whatever happens to you in your life, you take it as a special favor coming from Krishna for your refinement and for your advancement. And you don't ask the question, why me, why me, why me? You're considered to be in the most advantageous attitude possible, so much so that just by maintaining that one attitude throughout your life, you can inherit the kingdom of God. That means you go back to Godhead by the attitude. So surrender means changing your attitude, giving up an attitude that why me, and accepting the attitude of what's the lesson. That's surrender. And that's very practical. Also, you can adjust your attitude anytime you want. There's a little knob somewhere right behind your left shoulder. You might have never seen it before, but it has a attitude adjustment, and you just turn it. And you turn it and say, now I'm going to take a new attitude based on reality, which is that the whole world, the whole cosmic manifestation is a place for, it's a classroom. It's a place for learning and for refinement. And whatever happens to me, I'm going to accept it as a learning experience, as one of the lessons I'm supposed to learn. And that it's coming from a benevolent teacher who wants me to have the best. And if I accept that, that is what surrender means. One of the aspects of surrender. Okay, I have a few more, but before I do, I'll take some reflections or questions to amplify the conversation, if you have any. Of course, reflection, just, it means anything you heard so far, that stuck in your mind that you felt might be useful for you, that you take away in your pocket, and you say, yeah, I'm keeping this one. What one thing did you hear that you thought might be useful?
Well, Prabhu, Guru, Hare Krishna. What thing I took away from you, what you said was, when something goes bad in your life, I mean, I used to have that attitude, what you said before, of, why me kind of attitude. But as I've started chanting and this thing, that attitude is slowly going away. So I try to say everything is and what Krishna has for me. So that's something that I've been reflecting on every time. If things don't, I seem to go my way. So I feel that he must have a different plan than what I have, and so I surrender to that part to him. So that's been happening slowly. It hasn't completely happened, but it's happening.
Thank you, Nanda Kumar. Let's all try one time. Just say this mantra. What is the lesson?
What
Say
is
it.
the lesson?
Try it
What
two more
is the
times. What
lesson?
is the lesson? What is the lesson? 2 more times.
What is
the lesson?
What is the
What is the
lesson?
What is the
lesson?
lesson?
What is the lesson?
See, these are very powerful. So if something happens to you, you could ask the question, why me? But don't ask that question. Replace it with, what is the lesson? It's really hard to do, actually, because when something happens, my default attitude is, why me? Because nothing bad is supposed to happen to me. Everything good. That's my plan. My plan is that I'm going to enjoy the world. No inconvenience should come to me. And when an inconvenience comes, I think this is outrageous. Why am I being victimized by some kind of inconvenience in this life? But somebody who's on their way out of this material world and back to Godhead, it says, what is the lesson Krishna is trying to teach me here? It's simple adjustment, different mantra, and different attitude. What else did you hear? What other things?
So Guru Maharaj, Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna.
So when I ask that question, what is this lesson? Sometimes it is hard to really know what is it teaching me? What is the situation teaching me? Sometimes I feel like I'm not learning anything from it.
Well, it's helpful if you read the Bhagavatam. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the lessons are illustrated through the lives of others. So it's a good way to learn by reading about other people learning a lesson. Like there's a king named Maharaj Anga. And Maharaj Anga was a pure devotee of Krishna. But he had a son, and his son's name was Vena. Vena was the worst kid who was ever born. He'd play with his playmates, and in playing, he was so cruel that he'd kill his friends, throw them over cliffs and things like that, and come home and think it was really funny. And he was incorrigible child. And we hear about how Maharaj Anga underwent all kinds of suffering, even though he was a pure devotee. And later he realized that that Providence had given him a bad son. And he took more and more shelter of Krishna because of that. We hear about Gajendra, who was famous because when he got in trouble, Gajendra, he was an elephant on the heavenly planets, and he was enjoying life thoroughly until one day when he was in the lake, a crocodile caught his leg and wouldn't let go, and he fought for 100 years, but he couldn't fight off the crocodile. And then he started praying and saying, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. Anybody here ever have a crocodile on their leg?
No.
Many
Yes.
crocodiles.
The answer is yes, we all have a crocodile on our leg. There's so many crocodiles. Like right now, all over the world, it seems like a big crocodile is swallowing us all. What an inconvenience all of a sudden. That's what happened to Gajendra. He's in the middle of the lake, enjoying, thinking I'm the king of the jungle. And all of a sudden, a crocodile came out of nowhere. And when you're least expecting it, crocodile comes. So everyone was going, NBA was going, NFL was going, people were selling houses, people were going to work, people were chopping down trees, doing whatever they felt like doing. And all of a sudden, a big crocodile came and grabbed onto the whole world. And so what did Gajendra do? He said, excuse me, but dear Lord, I have a crocodile on my leg. Could you please help me out? he gave his heart and soul in prayer. And so when you make that statement, what's the lesson? Then go read Srimad Bhagavatam, and you'll hear what the lesson is. It'll come through the Bhagavad-Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam, or one of your teachers in Krishna consciousness will speak it. But the fact is, you may not hear an immediate echo, here's the answer, but you open your mind and you open your heart to what's the answer, that there is an answer. I just don't know what it is yet. That's the point of view of a devotee, that this was meant for something. Does that help?
Yes, Guru Maharaj, thank you.
Okay, good. Let's see if there are a couple more reflections or questions.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So Guru Maharaj, when I listen to these 2 points, the service to Krishna and your attitude, if you surrender with those 2 points, I was thinking that it automatically brings fearlessness as soon as you start sticking to these 2 points. If you try to do the other thing that you were not supposed to do, like my plan, and the second thing was why this happens to me, it automatically brings a fearness in your mind. Like you get scared, like why it is happening to me, and my plan is not working. But if you surrender and say it's Krishna's plan, that fearlessness automatically comes.
What a nice point. Well, what's the greatest fear in this world, would you say? Let's vote on it. Let's say, I don't know, what are the choices? Eric, what are some choices of things we could be afraid of?
About fear of intense pain.
Okay, fear of intense pain. We'll put that as number 1. Then we'll put number 2 as the IRS. And we'll put number 3 as death.
Intense pain.
So we got intense pain, IRS, or death. Which one is the most fearsome? Let's vote. Okay, number 1. Who wants to vote for number 1? Give us a vote like this. Okay. Who wants to vote for number 2? How about number 3? Number 3 is death. God, we're not getting many votes out of death here. Well, according to psychologists, death is the number 1. People, of course, people say this, people are more afraid of public speaking, but that's been debunked. People are more afraid of death. In fact, in one textbook I read by a psychologist called Denial of Death, he said that the human beings live their whole lives trying to avoid death because it's the most traumatic experience. In fact, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he names the different sufferings of the mind. And he says, of all the different kleshas or sufferings within the mind, clinging to life is the most troublesome. And the reason he says is because we've done it so many times and it's beyond inconvenient. It is absolutely horrendous what we undergo when we leave the one physical body and travel with our psychological body to a new physical body and have to undergo that whole change. And we have that samskar or impression in our mind, so we just don't like to do it. So fear of death. Now, what is death anyway? Death means that everything's taken away. And that's very disconcerting because I thought it was mine, right? Is everyone following? Okay, now what if you give it all away before death comes and knocks on your door? Death comes, knock, knock, knock. I'm here to take everything away. And you say, what? Sorry, you're too late. I already gave it to Krishna. There's nothing to take. So that's why devotees are fearless, because their attitude is that this doesn't belong to me. Everything belongs to Krishna, and they're giving away to Krishna. So Maharaj Katvanga in the Bhagavatam showed this example. He said, give everything away before death comes knocking at your door. doesn't mean you have physically take it down to the Goodwill and give away your house and all your cars and everything. But it does mean you have to change your purpose in life, that whatever I have is on loan and it's meant to be used in Krishna service, and you don't have an attachment to it. In the Gita, Krishna says, Brahmanyadaya karmani sangan kyatva karotiya lipyatena sapapena padma patram ivambasa. If you live like this, considering in your mind and heart that whatever I have, whatever I'm doing, it's all meant for Krishna's service. Then he said, you'll never be touched by material fear or sin, because you're like the lotus that grows out of the mud, lives in the water, but it's never touched by the mud or the water. So we're in the material world, but we don't have to be touched by it if we have this mood that everything belongs to Krishna, and I'm going to engage everything in his service.
Prabhu, there are some comments on the chat box. If you reflections, would you want us to share that?
Would you do that?
Yes, Prabhu. So Delia has a comment, and she's saying, I'm more afraid of suffering than of death. Death can happen in a moment, but suffering can go on forever. And then Dominic says, I feel I'm afraid of losing the people I love.
Can I mention something about suffering?
Yes.
It actually comes from a word in Latin that means to carry, to hold and carry. And therefore, that gives a little bit of logic to the statement that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Because there's a way in which we experience pain in the world by the interaction of our senses and their objects, but we don't necessarily have to carry it with us. And so I'm not disagreeing that you could be more afraid of intense suffering than of death. But I am saying that for those who are able to objectify pain to some degree, they're able to rise above it. And I've seen it before. I've seen very advanced devotees who are in pain for many years, but somehow or other they went on with their service and tolerated. And so I just thought I'd mention that as far as the word suffering goes. Okay, please go ahead.
So, and then the next one, let's just scroll down. Says, I feel, no, it's up there. I feel I'm afraid of losing the people I love, or of losing the material possessions / wealth I have built up.
Yes, and that this is the hardest thing, and it's not that it's not difficult, but first of all, start with the fact that it's inevitable, and realize that one of the main sufferings is holding on to something that's inevitably going to slip out of our fingers, and the idea that I will be able to hold on makes it painful, actually, the idea. However, I will say that for those who are trained in understanding, this is called anupashyati. You follow the Bhagavad-Gita, you follow the Srimad Bhagavatam, and you understand what it means, for instance, when a loved one leaves his or her body. Because right in the context of Bhagavad-Gita, it's the same pain that Arjuna was feeling before anybody left their body. He was standing in the middle of both armies, and he became unhinged, and he was suffering. The suffering takes place in the mind, because actually the mind is a kind of surface on which the impressions of the world are imprinted. Just like if you put your iPhone up, iPhone or whatever that other thing is, what's it called?
Android.
Oh yeah, Android or iPhone. You hold it up in camera mode, it'll take a picture, or it'll grab the image of the world that you pointed at, and then it makes an imprint on the digital surface inside, and then you can see it. So our minds are like that. They're taking in imagery from the outside world, and the manas is where it gets imprinted. And there are millions and unlimited impressions, not just from this life, but from previous lives. So when we're looking at the world, we're actually not seeing the world directly. We're seeing it on the lens of our mind. We're observing that. And more than that, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad-Gita that this whole material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. Doesn't he? In the 15th chapter, Urdhva mulam adashakam ashvatam praharavyam chandamsi yasiparnani yastam veda savedavit. There's a way in which Krishna describes how this material world is a reflective surface of itself, and then the spiritual world is reflected on this. So when you're looking at a situation, you don't actually see the world, you're only seeing it second hand, third hand in your mind, a reflection of a reflection. And the way we interpret what's happening going on in the world is what actually gives us suffering. We interpret it in a certain way. So that's what Krishna told Arjuna. You're interpreting this whole thing in a very foolish way, he said, and that's why you're suffering right now, because your relatives are not going to die, nor are you going to die, because you're indestructible. Your relatives are indestructible and nobody ever dies. They only change places. If you saw like that, where would the suffering come from if you had a perspective like that? So there is a way in which we will feel that pinch of separation, but Anupashyati, by cultivating knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, we'll be able to process it when that does happen, when the inevitable change comes, a loved one leaves, we're in the throes. We know where to go in order to process it, to understand what's actually taking place here. Reality isn't scary. The shadows are scary when we don't see what's actually taking place. And it seems like something extremely severe is happening, but Krishna says the soul can't be punctured, dried, cut, burned, nothing. It can't be changed at all. It's a higher energy.
Prabhu, Delia had a question. She raised her hand, if she may ask.
Yes.
Hi. So I'm sorry, I don't know the protocol. I'll obey, insist. I just had a reflection that we don't keep things physically, we keep things mentally, like including emotionally. Like the things I think I have them inside of like my mind and myself. So I was just thinking that suffering comes from losing that which you're attached to. And death is scary because it's one big loss of like everything that we're attached to. But apparently it also comes with like a loss of consciousness as we know it. But life is a continuous loss of so many things all the time. So it's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts because we're trying to hold on to something that can never be permanent. So that's my reflection.
Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you. Really nice. A nice summary of the whole idea that the suffering takes place from the mind. In fact, I'm writing a book right now, and the first chapter, the working title for the first chapter is All Suffering Takes Place Within the Mind. Mm. And I give a lot of evidence, just practical evidence, and also from the various wisdom literatures like the Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. They all say the same thing, just what you said. And that when change happens, we become disturbed. When it happens rapidly, we say that's a disaster. Mm. Disaster means rapid change. And the most dramatic and radical thing that anybody can do is to die, leave their body. It's like, hey, where'd you go? What just happened? It's very hard to accommodate. In fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a story about a king who was powerful king, and he fought his last battle and died on the battlefield, fell down in a heap with all his beautiful jewelry. He was biting his lip to show his prowess as he fell. And he had many queens who came and clutched his body and were crying. And Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, heard the wailing. And so he came there in the form of a little boy, 5 years old. And he said, why are you all crying? And they said, our husband, the king, is gone. And he said, you must be mistaken. I see him right there. And they said, no, you don't understand, little boy. He died. And he said, no, you don't understand. You never saw him. What you're holding on there is not him, because The subtle living entity inhabits, animates the body, but you never see it. So there's a mistake that's made due to lack of trenchant vision. Trenchancy means that you're able to see beyond the superficiality of the world. Like a cat, if you take a little paper and you make it into a bird and you put it in the end of a string on a stick and you start pulling it around the house, the cat will go after it all day long and never look up the string and at you and say, hey, you're doing that. That's not a bird, you're making that go. Whereas a monkey who's got a more developed brain, if you do that, he'll look right at you and go, what do you think, I'm crazy? I know, because monkeys are really smart. Once when I came out on my balcony, I was staying in India, I came out on my balcony and there was a big monkey standing there and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it to the door. So they can be very dangerous, actually, especially up on the roof. And so I pretended like I was picking up a rock and he was watching my hand. And then I pretended I threw it at him. And then he slightly flinched, but then he saw my hand and said, you don't have a rock, you idiot. And he came after me and I just made it into the building. So the more developed the consciousness of a living being, the more trenchant it is. In other words, the more you can see the cause, you can understand causality. And this is important because human beings who develop spiritually by reading Bhagavad-Gita, by practicing some sadhana, they're able to see beyond just the body, and they're able to see beyond just this lifetime, and they're able to see, okay, why did something happen to me? It's just random? No, there's a cause behind everything. And the more one is restricted in one's trenchant vision, the less one can understand what's really going on. So those who are devotees, they develop a fearlessness because they understand there is a cause behind everything. And it's also benevolent, a benevolent cause.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Anshul and Anchita, they raised their hand. I don't know.
But before that, there's some comments. Do you want to?
Let them.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So you mentioned about that crocodile story, that Gajraj story, and so I was trying to connect with the point of the surrender. My problem, or what I was thinking is, I think we are not able to identify the crocodile in today's world, especially with us. I mean, we see the crocodile is anything which is harming or scaring or affecting the material desires what we have, rather than being identifying the material desire itself as a crocodile. So whenever there is a problem in what possessions we have, we are reaching out to Krishna rather than of the feeling of why of having those material desires. I mean, I think if we can identify that as a crocodile, then I think it will be easier to reach out to Krishna. I think that's a big failure on our part. That's a reflection or question I have.
That's because you're an enlightened person, and you have the power of trenchance, and you're able to see beyond just what's going on a superficial level, and that's brilliant what you said. I mean, Krishna mentions the same thing in the Bhagavad-Gita when he talks about the way the enemy, kama rupa durasadam, he says the enemy is our own desire, which gets inflamed by association with the lower modes of nature, and then it becomes inordinate, and then it forces us to do things that are not in our interest. And when we rise above those, we're able to have a kind of vision that actually I've seen the enemy, and the enemy is me. In fact, this is what Prahlad Maharaj says: there is no enemy in all the worlds except my own uncontrolled mind and senses. Besides that, there's no problem. Everything's in order. Everything's working okay. But I really like your vision, and it's tracing it down to what is actually causing me the problem. And so that is something Krishna says you should develop intelligence to understand. For instance, at the end of the 3rd chapter of the Gita, he describes how there's a hierarchy. The lowest down is the senses. Above the senses is the mind. Above the mind is the intellect. And above the intellect is you, the Atma, the soul. And so he says just after that, he says, learn to strengthen your intelligence so that you can see the difference between your senses, your mind, your intelligence, and yourself, and understand how it's all working. And then you'll be functioning properly with a proper perspective. What else, Loka?
There are a couple more comments.
Okay.
You have to go up.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, just something short. It was interesting because right before we got on, me and my wife Ashley, we were on the phone with her mother, and her mother was sharing with us how she was kind of down, how she was experiencing some deaths in the family recently, and how she was kind of down. And we were sharing with her, and she was saying that those deaths were kind of on her mind. Those individuals are on her mind, and she was saying that we were telling her that those people were probably present in spirit with her, and she kept saying that Krishna was calling her to do more, and it seemed as things were moving faster for her, and she just couldn't figure it out, and we were sharing more ways of her for her to surrender to Krishna, and we mentioned meditation, and she jumped excited like that's it, so it was very interesting how you mentioned surrendering, and and talking about Arjuna and how this isn't permanent. The bodies that we have are not permanent, and that you're not destroying anything. When somebody dies, you're not actually suffering a death. And right now it's so interesting because we're wearing these masks. It's kind of like we're accepting man's plan, and Krishna is speaking for us. This is demanding for us to do more, inside of his plan.
Is that Daryl?
Yes.
Yeah, that was really nicely put, Daryl. Thank you very much for mentioning that. Along with that, the way I've been talking sort of clinically about how we're not our body, you leave the body, you go to another body. There is a way in which we have some kind of processing to do. It's not that when you cut yourself because you're a devotee, you don't bleed. And also if you lose a loved one, obviously you're going to feel it, because just like with the mother, you have an umbilical cord when you're born. There's a psychic umbilical cord you have with your mother. I see even people that don't like their parents, they still go home and see them on the holidays and suffer through that, because there's a deep attachment that's there. And that is something that's very natural, because our body and mind is part of the material world. And so there's a story in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam about one of the incarnations of Krishna named Hamsa. And there are these sages, 4 Kumaras, and they want to ask a question about how to have perspective in the material world and how to be free from material desires. And so Hamsa's conclusion is that it's not that we can detach our minds from the world, but that we detach ourselves from our minds, because the mind is part of the world, is inextricably attached to it. So yeah, what you said, Daryl, is very true. And then at the same time, Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita that we should have compassion for those who are suffering, knowing what it's like to go through such things. He says, Atmau pamyena sarvatra samam pashiti Arjuna, sukham va yarivadukam sayogi paramumata. The best yogi is the one who's able to see all these things, what's actually going on, but at the same time, be able to offer compassion to others, knowing that it hurts. Because when somebody's in the midst of it, it's not like you can just say, oh, get over it. You're not your body. In fact, I'll tell you a story. When I lived in the ashram, in St. Louis, Missouri, there was a senior devotee who got the flu, and he had a high fever, and he was lying there in his sleeping bag. And there were some very new people who had joined the ashram who were just getting used to it and had heard a little bit of the philosophy, "You're not your body." And so my friend and godbrother, he groaned because he was in pain. And so one of the newbies said to him, "Prabhu, you're not your body." And he took all the strength that he could to get up on one elbow and look over where this brahmachari was brushing his teeth, very cheerfully telling him he's not his body. And this person said to him, "Prabhu, you're not my body either." So, you know, we are from another realm, but we're having a bodily experience. So Krishna says we should have compassion at the same time for those who are going through it. And, you know, we can't expect that we or anybody else can just immediately deal with that unless you're on an extremely high level. You have to process it on both levels. For instance, we always recommend you go through the grieving process. It's a kind of healing. When you lose somebody, you can't bypass that. Your body has to go through it. So there's a way to practically deal with the world, an enlightened engagement with the world at the same time, holding this vision that we're not our body above our head. Look, I have a couple of more suggestions for things to reject and things to accept.
Yes,
May
sir.
I?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So here's some areas where you can surrender. And this is a really important one, the next one. And that's your attention. Attention, A-T-T-E-N-T-I-O-N, attention. Because our attention is the only thing that's quintessentially ours. We already established you didn't get a lease on your body. You don't get to keep your toothbrush, your car, rabbit, anything that you have, it's going to be taken away. But the one thing that you always have is your attention. And it is your free will to decide where to place it. That's our freedom, where you're going to place your attention at any given time. So this attention is very important in the process of surrender and accepting what's favorable. So what's favorable? Use your attention to think of Krishna. Use your attention to hear about Krishna. Don't use your attention just to think about yourself or your body or to hear about the material world. There's no need to hear the 24 hours news cycle unless you have some service in it. You don't have to hear about the history of other bodies necessarily unless there's some service in it. But if you do spend time hearing about Krishna and hearing about his instructions and thinking of Krishna, then you become a great yogi. And it's the main instruction Krishna gives in the Gita, Manmana Bhavamad Bhakto. He said, just think of me. So you can surrender your attention. So in any given situation from moment to moment, you can decide, where am I going to place my attention? On Krishna or on something that is worldly? And the more that in that moment, when you decide to use your attention to think of Krishna, to hear about Krishna like you're doing right now, that's surrender. That's favorable. Okay, I have two more. The next thing to accept is satisfaction. I know this one's going to sound funny, but did you know that satisfaction is a practice? So in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna says you should practice satisfaction. What does that mean? Be happy with whatever comes to you by your reasonable effort in the world. Don't get overheated and try to get more and more and more. Work harder and harder, because numbers go to infinity, and it doesn't matter how much money you have, you're always going to need more. There is a hierarchy of needs where you can't be starving on the street. But the fact is, by your reasonable effort, be satisfied. Do the best you can with what you have right now and be satisfied with whatever comes of its own accord. That's surrender. The opposite of that is dissatisfaction. You can practice dissatisfaction because no matter what you get, you can say it's not enough. Have you ever seen that? I've done it myself as a kid. I mean, I do it all the time, but as a kid, I remember I wanted this toy and I was just, it consumed me. I had to have this toy. And when it came to me on Christmas morning, the time everyone gives gifts in America, and or Christmas Eve, I got the toy. I played with it about half an hour and then I completely rejected it. It wasn't what I thought. And that's the story of the world, because the material energy is very clunky and inconvenient and forever incompatible with us. And therefore, we're always going to feel dissatisfied. So Krishna says, if you want to surrender to me, practice being satisfied with what comes its own accord. And I have one last one. And that is, be a better listener. This goes to attention, but it's of something very specific. Learn to be a really good listener, because if you learn to listen, especially to Krishna's instructions without your mind wandering, then you'll become very advanced in spiritual life. And the opposite of that is cultivating distraction. Distraction is torture. Focus is nectar. And if you learn to focus and listen carefully, then you'll feel happy, and it's a kind of surrender. You're giving up your listening power to listen to Krishna's instructions, to the chanting and things like that. And you'll advance very quickly through that kind of surrender. And Loka, are there any last few points or questions? Yes. Okay.
So Dominic had a point.
Okay.
And after that, I think Shashi Prabhu. Yeah. And then there's some comments also.
Great. You all have such good comments and questions. This is a very advanced class, but I'm not surprised since Loka and Vidarbha are leading it.
Go ahead, Dominic.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for your
Hare
kind
Krishna.
words.
You're welcome.
I was just reflecting on the idea of being a thrill seeker and kind of reflecting on my own life and the way that I've been dissatisfied, I guess, with like not having the interesting life, or, you know, seeing the influence of other people around me that say, you know, you should be here, or you should be doing this, or this is the goal. And then kind of having to reevaluate my own life and be satisfied with the gift that life is, and not knowing, you know, when that could be taken from you, or just see different situations that make you so much more appreciative and grateful of where you are in life. And that's really helped to change my perspective on where I'm at. And, you know, I'm pretty young too. So like, I feel like being dissatisfied with life at my age is kind of a mistake and a choice in itself. So I would just like to thank you for saying that and helping me to clarify that in my mind and reinforce that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's a really important point, Dominique. Let me nuance this conversation a little bit. In one way, dissatisfaction is really good when it leads you to a sense that this material world is not for me. It's something that Prabhupada writes about in the Bhagavatam, where he said, if you're feeling dissatisfaction, it's a sign that you're actually a spiritual being and not material. Because if you were material, you wouldn't notice the inconvenience of the material world. You wouldn't notice how banal, how boring, how inconvenient it is. If it was the same energy as you, that's because there's a dichotomy, and it is inconvenient. Always. You're forever incompatible with the material world. So when you develop a sense of dissatisfaction categorically from the material world, and you say enough's enough, then you can say, I'm going to cultivate a spiritual practice, and I'm going to learn to be satisfied with that. And the wealthiest person in the world is a person who doesn't have material desires, because material desires can never, ever be fulfilled. A material desire actually means you can't fulfill it. There is no way to fulfill a material desire. It only expands when you get something. It goes to infinity. But spiritually, you can find a way to feel satisfied. I'll give you an example. The first 13 years, well, of my adolescence, I was 16 when I joined the ashram. And I lived for 13 years without any money. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have anything. Of course, I traveled all over the world, and I had an unbelievable life, opulent life of just being around friends, had the best food, but I didn't have any possessions at all. All I had was my service, and it was just a joyful life every day with no burdens whatsoever. And I have that in my psyche. I know, even as I move about the world nowadays, I know I have that sense that you can be happy without anything. All you need is a Bhagavad-Gita and a little corner of the room to sit in, and you can go off in another world and feel completely satisfied. And if you can get that, a little molecule of that once a day, even for a fraction of a second, go like, hey, I actually feel okay right now. I feel satisfied from this. That balances you for the rest of your day. And if you develop a little more than a molecule, then it balances you throughout your whole life. Yeah, nice observations, Dominic. Thank you.
Shashi, I think.
Shashi has a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Hello, Prabhu. Thanks for giving this opportunity. I have one question. That the first thing that you said was that to gamble away your trust in Lord. That seems like what I feel like people who have that kind of a constitution where they can gamble, or the extreme example that you have used, can easily do that. And even in God, they can trust that easily. But for me, or a lot of people like me who have lived their life in a very measured way, it feels like I need to take I need to be more cautious about gambling that away, give the trust away in Lord, whom exactly what you said, that you don't know that you have signed this lease, or whether he even exists or not. Sometimes you do question that too. So how is it that people who live this really boring life, not living on the edge, but who have lived this measured life, their whole constitution is about not giving into that and take every step very cautiously? So how do we give that? That's why I think like surrender is really hard for me to give it. And I have tried many examples. So even in the Bhagavad-Gita, we have always discussed about how Draupadi was surrendering and Arjuna shouldn't surrender. So that dichotomy of that, I feel like Draupadi should have fought. Well, Arjuna, it was okay to give up before the war, not think about all this killing his family and everything. That was okay. That is what I would do. And it is exactly opposite the way that Lord has thought about it. So surrender is a really confusing topic for me. And how do I'm like, is it an intuition or is it by practice? How do you get to that point? I really don't, I cannot wrap my head around that part of surrender.
Oh, yes. Understood. Thank you for such a nice question. Prabhu, the way I get to it is by starting with the end in mind. You know, Stephen Covey, he wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. He said, start with the end in mind. So for me, if you're asking how I do it, is I start with the end in mind, which I did at the beginning of the talk. And I said, it's not mine anyway, and it's all going to go away. So I start by looking and saying, like, what do I actually get to keep? You know, I look at my house here and I go, okay, it's a house, but I was there with my parents. I was there with my mother, at least, when she left the world. And I noticed as soon as she left her body, she left all of her stuff. She had tons of stuff too. She had books and art and house and cars and all kinds of stuff. And I was just sitting there next to her side after she left. And I was thinking, you know, you just left all your stuff here. And that's what happens. And so if I look at my own life and I say, this stuff is all but gone right now. And therefore giving it preemptively makes a lot of sense to me. That just makes logical sense to me. In fact, I'll tell you an instance where it happened to me spontaneously. So I was in India at this time of year. I'm usually there this time of year for a retreat. And So one of the first things I did, I would have been there for a full month. And then I went to a special, very sacred little pond. It's called Radhakund, the most beautiful place for me in the world. And then you go there and you take a little dip in the water. And so I got there, and there was lots of people. There's a lot of people in that area. It's a time of the month when lots of pilgrims, and there's hustle and bustle going on. And so of course, you wear a cloth when you go in, but you take off your other clothes and all my stuff, and I put it on the side. And I went in, I said a few mantras and prayers, and I took a dip. And then I came out, and all my stuff was gone. So that meant my clothes and my whatever was in my pockets. There was some money and the pen and my notebook and a few things like that. I just walked down there. And so then all I had was what's called a gamsha. It's this cloth you wrap around your lower portion, and then I had still about 4 miles to walk home with no stuff. So I walked back, pretending that I was some holy person with no clothes, practically. And I got back to the ashrama. Now at the ashrama, at the end of my stay there, I always give a donation to the president, who runs it. But this time I went right to my locker. I had just arrived, and I took out my donation now, and I gave it immediately. And why did I do that? Because it was fresh in my mind that anything can happen, anything could be taken at any second. Now, I'm going to tell you a joke that illustrates the point. Is that okay? Permission?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So these two guys are walking down the street together talking, and one evening in the city, and this robber jumps out from behind the trash container, and he holds a gun on these two friends, and he says, okay, put your hands up and give me all your money. And one of the gentlemen who's being held up says, okay, that's fine, no problem, I'll give you all the money, just wait 1 second, can you hold on 1 second? And the robber said, okay. So he pulls out his wallet, and he turns to his friend, and he says, Dilip, here's that $20 that I owe you. Thanks, Loka. This is preemptive giving because it's going to be taken away. So before it's taken, just apportion it properly. That's what that surrender actually means. And then how do you get into that mood? Well, Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita, do what you can right now with what you can actually do. So he gives this whole progression that if you're not on the level where you feel really bold and you can hand over everything, you start with something small. In fact, he says, Patram pushpam palam toyam. Just give me a leaf. Hand over a leaf and say, here, this is for you. Or anything that you're doing in your life, just offer it and say, hey, I'm doing this as an offering for God. That he says, yet kodoshi arashnashi as johosi dadasya. Whatever you do, make it as an offering to me. Start there. And the first thing I always realize when I give something, just for instance, have you ever been thinking about giving a donation? And then, your mind's going, well, wait a minute. Yeah, I don't think you can afford that. And then suddenly, the heroic part of you says, no, I'm going to give it anyway. And then, you say, raise your hand and say, I'm giving. And you put in your donation. So what's the first thing you realize when that happens? You didn't die. You're still alive. And you actually feel okay. It's like it wasn't yours anyway. And you put it in. And so you start to get a sense for actually when you give, you grow. When you give, you become freed from fear. When you give, you actually become more capable of navigating the world. And you get in the flow of giving, and that's what bhakti is. You start with something really small, whatever you can give now, and just start giving. And as you start to notice that actually, I am a giver. That's what I do. I do service. And as you grow, Krishna will give you more strength in your heart to give more and more and more. And then the idea that I'm depending on Krishna becomes your motto in life. And that's actually reality. We can't protect ourselves from anything. There's no protection in the material in this world at all, except for taking shelter of Krishna.
So, Prabhu, I mean, when you said that, think about the end, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I always think about that, and this might be very specific example from specific to me itself, I guess, because the fear of the end for me is not that I don't want to. I want to keep this materialistic things, or I'm losing my relationships or anything. My fear has always been that the idea that, unfortunately, I'm kind of a black sheep of the group. So I'll say that. So that my fear is that there might be nothing. My doubt of any existence, that I feel like maybe there is nothing. And this, I accuse that on the education and training that I got from schooling on onwards, that everything we need to be skeptical about. That's how I have been trained. And that makes me, that helps me in my work, because that helps me critical analysis and everything. You have to be skeptical about everything to prove a hypothesis. But then that life that I have to live in my materialistic life, all the principles and concepts that I do apply kind of are opposing in my spiritual life, where I need to trust, I need to give it that. So this conflict between my spiritual life and my material life, it's very hard to comprehend. I feel like I'm in a mixed puzzle where, do I trust? That kind of a doubt. How do you get rid of the doubt is my question. And I feel blessed every day. I mean, don't get me wrong, I feel blessed every day. But at the same time, I'm also like asking, I'm shouting towards into the deep abyss that, Lord, please show me, reveal yourself to me in some way every day, so that I can trust you every day. But that kind of a concept goes in a cyclical way, and I'm not able to find the answer. So if you can help me through this, it could be very, because I see everybody here, they have such conviction and everything, but I mean, I still have a doubt. So how do you get rid of that? I'm lost.
Well, you're not alone. This is what you just said is a prayer, a mantra that's repeated over and over and over again in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there, like Devahuti, whose son was Kapiladev, who came to teach Sankhya, theistic Sankhya. So Devahuti, you could read her prayer. She said the same thing. How am I ever going to get over this? And it seems like I am part of the material world. There's no way out of this. And Kapiladev said, be patient, here for a long time. Here, H-E-A-R, here for a long time, and continue, and you'll be able to overcome it. But it's not uncommon. And also, Kapiladev says, doubting is not bad. It's a function of the intelligence. The intelligence has to doubt in order to discriminate and find what's good and what's bad. So as you hear more from Krishna and from Krishna's representatives, you'll notice that your intelligence, your doubting function will gradually become honed into one thing. And you'll be able to understand that you doubt the temporary world. Nasato vidite bhavo nabhavo vidite sata uvayor apidrishnon tas tvanayos tatvadarshibhi. This means that when your doubting function becomes very sharpened, then you'll doubt the material world and not the spiritual world. And also, I have one verse just for you from Krishna, exactly for you. He says in the Bhagavad-Gita, Vitaraga bhaya kroda manmaya mamupashrita bhavo jnana tapasa putamad bhavamagata. And what this means is, Krishna says, Vita means to give up. Give up these three things. First one is raga. Raga means an overheated attachment to the material world. The second one, Vita raga bhaya, means a fear, the fear of a personal existence. And the third is krodha, an anger that arises because there's so many conflicting ideas and philosophies, seemingly. He says, however, bahavo jnana tapasa, don't worry. A lot of people have become purified and been able to give these three things up and actually enter into full-blown spiritual life because of it. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Loka Vidarbha. It was so nice to meet you all. You know, I've checked in a couple times on you. It's been so busy, hasn't it? This is the busiest pandemic I've ever been in. And you know, it's been so nice when I checked in and I saw your whole group and I could see your faces. You're all focusing, concentrating for weeks and weeks and weeks and hearing so nicely. And this will all have its effect. Even if you don't feel it now, it goes in, it'll have a systemic effect on you. And it's just wonderful what you've done. And I just feel so honored to have been here for the last part of it, to have just taste a little piece of this pie that you've been feasting on for so long.
Thank you so
You
much.
are the baker.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Prabhu.
Thank you, everybody. Can
Thank
you
you.
all
Hare
unmute
Krishna.
and say Hare Krishna?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. See you again soon. Hare Bol.
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Bol.
Haribol. 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 Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Dhanyavad.
Thank you. Yeah, Prabhu is gone. So now we are left in separation. Right, so we'll continue back on Monday. And it's so nice to see everybody's faces. Finally, I think it took Prabhu to come so that we could see all of you. So maybe after 3 months, we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare
Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
I have to get up on.